Okay, so we have the uh, privilege of having Aleks Petakov on tonight, and this is special for the Patreon. So we're starting something Bigfoot Society case files, and Alex came to mind right away to try to get him on for an interview on the Mogollon Monster because that is one of the things that Chasing Legends is focused on for the new series that's coming out. Correct, Alex?
Yeah, exactly. So the Mogollon Monster was one of four cryptid legends across the country that we actually went and investigated on the ground. So that's really where kind of what I learned about the Mogollon Monster came from. I didn't know a whole lot before. There's not a
Mm-hmm.
lot of information about it online. It's one of those very regionalized local Bigfoot type stories, and I'm sure we'll talk a little bit more about the kind of specifics. But yeah, that's sort of how I got into it, was for Chasing Legends, and that will be one of our
Cool.
four episodes about the Mogollon Monster.
Super looking forward to it. I have Nash. Nash pretty much invited himself on. It was really funny. I'm like, good for Nash. Anyways, that's beside the point. But Nash is cool. End of October, he'll be on to talk about
Awesome.
Chasing Legends. So yeah, but yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, so basically, I've heard of the Mogollon Monster for a while. I had heard of the story, I want to say back in like the mid 2000s when I was middle school, high school, that kind of thing, just sort of
Mm-hmm.
armchair researcher. I had seen this news piece done by an Arizona news, and it was interviewing some Native Americans that were on a reservation out there in the mountainous ridge area, I guess, of the Mogollon Rim. I didn't really know a whole lot about it. That's the first time I ever heard about it. And they were interviewing folks on the reservation. They were talking about, yeah, we've seen this thing. And there
Mm.
was a story of a guy who found a toenail that was just like a
Oh.
toenail out in the woods, and that was collected and later submitted. I'm not sure if it was
Mm.
part of the Ketchum DNA study with all that,
Oh
with all
yeah,
what that
the
is. I'm not.
Elba Ketchum DNA. Yeah, yeah,
Yeah,
yeah. Sure. Yeah.
don't quote me on that. I'm not sure if that was part of that, but I do know. I think either Meldrum or somebody else looked at the
Okay.
toenail as well, and I
Wow.
think it was very very interesting because that's the first time I really heard of it, and I had never seen anything about the Mogollon Monster until recent years. I'd seen people talking about it, a couple of YouTube videos here and there. It wasn't
Mm-hmm.
really until I teamed up with Nash and Eli Watson and the whole Chasing Legends group that we started kind of doing some research about the Mogollon Monster. And Nash was reaching out to people in Arizona. It was actually proven to be
Wow.
pretty difficult to talk, get people who kind of knew about it. There wasn't a
Hmm.
lot on it. It is, like I said, it's known sort of in the Bigfoot circles, but I don't think it's as well known as, of course, the Falk Monster or Patty of the
Yeah.
Patterson Gimlin film, or
Right.
Skunk Ape, the Mayaka photos. You have a lot of different stuff.
Mm-hmm.
There isn't really anything for the Mogollon Monster. So we, once we hit the ground, we actually talked to a guy in the Phoenix area who's originally from New England, which was
Oh,
interesting.
really?
He
Okay.
was, yeah, he was thick, Boston accent kind of
Oh,
guy.
that's funny. Yeah, yeah. Nice.
Had been living in Arizona for a long time. He'd actually was living in the Bridgewater Triangle area and had some weird stuff happen
Oh,
there.
yeah.
He lived out east, but he is one of the researchers for the Arizona Cryptozoology Society.
Okay.
So we interviewed him, this guy named Alex Hearn, and he told about
Mm-hmm.
kind of the origins of the Mogollon Monster and all the stuff associated with it. So I should say, I'll back up a second and say beforehand, I had talked to David Weatherly,
Yep.
who had written a book about cryptids in Arizona, and
Yeah. Yeah.
I'd asked him about the Mogollon Rim. I said, what stories, he says, obviously now with COVID, it's going to be tough to just go sit down in a bar and talk to some of these old cowboys, because
Right.
those are the kind of people that have the stories about what's happening. So fast forward to actually being there in July. This was late July. We were out there filming for 4 days, and we were interviewing this guy Alex, and he was, I think, the one who had found the toenail back in the day. So that was really
Oh,
interesting.
really? Okay.
Yeah,
Nice.
very very interesting to talk to him. And just he told us a little bit about the background of the Mogollon Monster. So basically, it's a story that originated with scout camps that were up in this area. So the Mogollon Rim itself, this part of Arizona, it's only about 2.5 hours north of Phoenix, which is in a big valley surrounded by a lot of different
Mm-hmm.
mountains.
Yep.
It's very desertous, very different from where the Mogollon Rim is. And the closest town to the rim is called Payson, Arizona. Now, it's a lot of pine forests, pine trees. It's not what you'd expect from Arizona. Before there was a road linking Phoenix or the Phoenix metro area to Payson, it would take almost 9 hours to get there.
Oh, wow.
So it was completely untouched up until like the 1960s. That's when they put the highways in. So until then, I mean, you really couldn't there was no direct route to get to the Payson area. So it was like a favorite camping spot of a lot of people. But pre-World War II, I believe there was scout camps, Boy Scouts that would go up into the mountains, and they would have really weird things happen to them. And there was one in particular where they didn't, this was before the Bigfoot moniker existed. I guess they decided to call it the Mogollon Monster because the area that they're in, it's the Mogollon Rim is kind of like this canyon-like thing. Basically, it's where the Colorado Plateau hits up with the kind of the mountainous area, the desert area, and it just creates this rim that you can go to the edge, and it's hundreds of miles long. It stretches through central Arizona almost into New Mexico, and in the rim itself, kind of the low area, and then on the rim itself, it flattens out, but it's all pine forest. There's just forest as far as you can see. I mean, it's a lush environment. It's completely different than what you'd expect from Arizona. I mean, we went there obviously under the impression that there was a lot of forest and that kind of stuff, but the first drive from Payson, which is about 45 minutes to the rim itself, you just start driving through the trees, and then it kind of opens up, and you see these valleys and these hip mountains in the distance, and you see the rim itself, and there's just endless forest. And I think we all kind of got the impression of, wow, there could be something out here. This is like the perfect sort of habitat, as seen in many other parts of the country, where something like a Bigfoot could sustain itself.
Exactly.
Well, that was really interesting. And like I said, what was interesting about Payson was, we went to the local Dunkin' Donuts, and Dunkin' Donuts has a lot of these.
Right.
It's a cheap thing to get in the morning, get your coffee, get your fix for a day of production, and stomp it around the woods. And they have those culotta type things, right?
Yep.
Well, they had the local one. They had a special one called the Mogollon Monster, and it was basically
that's really funny.
It's a Monster energy drink and some of the like culotta mix.
Oh, for real?
Yeah. So that was
that's a terrible idea, but
it was crazy.
Yeah,
I think, one of our crew guys ended up getting it, and he said, it was pretty good. Helped them stay energized. But I asked the one of the workers, and I'm like, why did you guys name it that? Is that like in reference to the monster? He said, yeah, the owner named it that. Like, I guess Finding Bigfoot came here once, and they were interested in Bigfoot. Didn't know a whole lot about the story. Because when I had talked to David Weatherly initially, like I said, he said that a lot of these stories, the old cowboys just have them, living up in the woods, and they would have strange stuff happen to them as well. But yeah, the rim is really an interesting place because it's, like I said, I mean, it's not what you'd expect. We had pretty much consistently weather in the 50 degrees and raining almost every day, because the way it works is where this Colorado Plateau hits with the other plateau, I don't know, from more of the desert area. That's where the weather from the Colorado Plateau meets up, and it creates this crazy atmosphere where it's just cold and rainy in the middle of July in Arizona. To contrast,
weird.
It was 107 degrees in Arizona. I mean, in Phoenix, and then it would be 50 degrees and raining in the Mogollon Rim, and that's only 2 hours away by car. Yeah.
Oh man. If
you can believe that, we went from one day of wearing, jackets and bundled up to the next day being out in 106-degree weather and just, sweating through everything you have on.
That's crazy, dude.
Yeah.
I love it.
So we then met up with a couple of local researchers on the rim itself, and their camp was like an hour into the woods, driving down these terrible dirt roads and going through huge puddles, and it was a very remote camp. And they were this guy Chuck and his research partner. Chuck, I believe, was with the Arizona BFRO. He's one of the only researchers for Arizona, believe it or not.
Oh wow. And
they would actually go out into the woods and stay for 5-6 days at a time and just stay in this one camp. And they claim over the years they've had interactions with Bigfoot-like creatures in this particular area. And they say, that happens all the time. They camp out there while they can, because half of the year the roads are inaccessible there because they get 3-4 feet of snow, and it just shuts the whole area
really
down.
In Arizona?
Yeah.
That's so crazy, man.
It is really interesting. So we interviewed those folks, and this guy Chuck, he had been living in the area most of his life, and they just told us a lot about some of the experiences they had had, weird things happening around the camp, and talking to other people who've had things happen. And we
Mm-hmm.
got a chance to walk around the woods, and you're really in some thick pine trees. And what's so interesting about forests out west, you have a lot more pines than you do
Okay.
out in the east, right? I mean, aside from some states like Maine, the Pine State, you have a
Sure.
lot more of it's a more drier type forest. It's not as
Mm.
lush. But you'll have a lot of these tall grasses, and then you'll have an aspen patch. So there are these aspens have
Mm.
the white bark. So you'll just see this huge
Okay.
patch of white trees, and you'll walk through the middle, and it's really weird. It's very cool to see. So we got to walk around and see some supposed structures and that kind of stuff.
Oh, cool.
But yeah, it was definitely an interesting experience, and just kind of what we could learn from folks is that there was the stories basically date back to folks having stuff happen. And one of the researchers we talked to, when he was a Boy Scout younger, they had something happen where something repeatedly was coming off of a hill and trying to get into their camp, and
Oh, really?
their counselors had seen it, and it was just kind of, they all were terrified because they didn't know what it was, but it was this humanoid like figure out in the woods just trying to get
Oh,
into
man.
their camp. So those are the stories. It's an untouched wilderness for the most part. I mean, there's a lot of people going up now and camping in that
Okay.
area, but there's certain roads. Once you go off the road, I mean, you're kind of in the middle of nowhere. We did investigating, just stomping around the woods, and myself and Eli Watson, we actually hid up in behind some trees on a ridge as the rest of our
Mm-hmm.
group was like right below us. Thought we were going to get seen 100%. They had no idea we were standing right there. Kind of
Really?
a little
Oh,
stealth
man.
experiment. Yeah, we were finding elk bones. We actually encountered a herd of elk multiple times. So
Oh, man.
a lot of stuff, a lot of interesting stuff happened. Definitely.
That's gonna be no, I'm looking forward now. I'm even looking forward more to watching that particular episode. Like, it blew me away just finding out that there's this huge like forest place in Arizona, which
Yeah.
no idea. I always thought it was desert. But
Right.
um, do you go over in the episode? Do you go over like I would? So first question I would ask Alex. It's Alex, right?
Yeah.
The gentleman, yeah. I would ask him straight, like, how did you know it was like a toenail, right?
Right.
Like, what went through your head? Like, I don't know if you guys go over that in the episode or not, but like, I'm actually in talks with. We might have an interview for the future because you gave me the names of some
Yeah.
people but his daughter's getting married this week, so
Right. Right. So
maybe in a few weeks or so we'll have a follow up. But
yeah, that'd be cool.
um,
I mean, it was interesting. Definitely, he was kind of not really into. He hadn't been up in the Payson area for a while, but back when he first moved to Arizona, I guess he was heading up there pretty often. And it is such a beautiful location. I mean, as a nature lover, if I lived in that area,
mhm.
I would absolutely love to be up there all the time. As interesting as the desert is, I mean, there's nothing like a forest. We
Yeah,
did a daytime investigation, then a nighttime investigation. We had some pretty interesting stuff happen that
really.
I will, I won't say too much about,
Yeah, yeah. Save that for the you know,
but
surprise for the episode, definitely.
like I said, it was just so interesting. This environment, it really was not what we expected. Like I said, just even the rain, it was raining every day. We'd get
Mm.
drizzles of rain, and you'd come to this scenic outlook where you're just standing on this edge, and there's, a drop off, and then the wind will pick up and it starts raining again. And it's just this green, lush area where there's just a lot of these pine trees everywhere, and elk herds, and there's mountain
Wow.
lions up there. There's plenty of
Oh.
black bear, a lot of that sort of stuff. So, like I said, people go up there camping, and a lot of people have had stuff happen while they've been out camping, and that's a lot of the more recent Mogollon Monster stories have been that. So
Mm.
the behavior wise sort of similar to what you'd expect from Bigfoot in other parts of the country.
Okay.
It's just there really doesn't seem to be a lot about it. I mean, even in Payson, aside from the Dunkin' Donuts thing, there was not really much of like an embrace of the Mogollon
I
Monster.
was gonna ask that because it seems like these places, you either have a Point Pleasant type deal
Yeah.
where it's like, let's go crazy, or maybe you have more like a Van Meter type place where they go crazy one day a year, but then the rest of the year they don't care. It sounds like this Payson place doesn't really give a rip except for Dunkin' Donuts.
Yeah, I mean, I could be wrong because we were there during this whole COVID thing. So
Okay,
obviously, we
that's
didn't
true. Yeah.
we didn't really talk to very many locals. We talked as many as we could, just through our limited interactions. kind of going around, but we were mostly focused on staying in Payson because it's the closest area to the rim. So because, we would just drive about 45 minutes to an hour to get to the rim and then spend the rest of the time exploring, or even heading a further hour in deeper to go with those researchers and hang out their camp. We stayed there for a while, and
Okay.
we're kind of researching with them as well, just sort of seeing what they're up to and that kind of stuff. So yeah, really an interesting environment. As an like I said, as a nature lover, just super cool to see that sort of thing. And that is the kind of environment you'd expect something like this to live. I mean, there
Totally.
are other species that thrive there. We had elks bugling at us, and like I said, finding elk bones and seeing a herd of elk, and even on the floor, just driving on the side of the road and having an elk, 10 feet from us, right on the side of the road.
Wow.
Plenty of food, plenty of resources up there. And half the year it's not even accessible because there's just too much snow. They don't plow a lot of these dirt roads. So
So it's definite food source. It sounds like probably the main food source would be like elk. But is there a big like fishing, a lot of fishing that goes on in that area at all you picked up on, or?
there's definitely a few ponds. I'm not sure if they stock them or not.
Okay.
I assume
Yeah.
they do. There was a couple ponds are little lakes where you could go fishing. But like I said, it's really weird because once you're up on the rim section, it's all just flat terrain mostly. When the rim drops off and it's a 1,000 feet or so down,
Wow.
in the valley is where you start getting these hills and rolling hills, and in the distance you can see actual legit mountains, because I know the mountain range there is called the White Mountains, coincidentally, very similar to the White Mountains in my home state of New Hampshire. So that was cool. And from what I understand, once you get up on that rim, and if you keep driving out that way, you will get to the White Mountains, and actually very close to the area where the Travis Walton abduction story happened. I believe that. Yeah, so that's right in that area, and that was in
an
Snowflake.
Unexpected combination there, man.
Yeah. So Snowflake, Arizona, I believe, is where that happened. And I was even looking on the map, about an hour and a half away from where we were, right at the edge of the rim. There's this petrified forest national park where it's like those petrified trees just sitting there. So it's a really cool area. I mean, but there's just so much woods out there. Even just 10 feet off the road, you're finding evidence of animals and predation and that kind of stuff.
That's awesome, man. Did just a few minutes, a few questions at the end. So did they say that it would always have like a certain color to it? I'm curious about that, or like multi-variants of it when
I'm not sure. I don't recall anybody really mentioning there was a specific coloration. The general Bigfoot, it was, it can be brownish, blackish, tannish, that sort of thing. General, like, description of other Bigfoots. There were no characteristics that stood out as being unusual. Like some places they report more red eye shine, and others in the South, they often report it's a little bit smaller with shaggier hair. The way it was reported was mostly just typical, sort of stereotypical Bigfoot description. Patty-like, I would even venture to say.
Same height as normal, you would say, probably.
Large. Yeah. Aside from people that have claimed to see juveniles and that sort of stuff, but
sure.
The same sort of thing you'd expect in most of the rest of the country.
And
North America.
Any stories about like that include like maybe orbs, or pretty much just like straight, there's something in the woods, Bigfoot style, primate, etc.
Yeah, some of the researchers, they had talked a little bit about orbs and that sort of stuff as well, and maybe a possible paranormal explanation. Not really sure, but like I said, the most interesting story, I guess, in that realm of things would have been that the Travis Walton thing was right there. I mean, we stopped at this little station right there because this is part of a national forest, so there was like an observation station where there was a nice scenic look, and on the inside there were some of the park rangers there, and we asked them like, Mogollon Monster stories, and they were like, people talk about it, but we're actually really close to where famous alien abduction happened. That's like the first thing they talked about, even more so than the Mogollon Monster itself. But we'd go to little places, and there was like a one gas station up there on the rim that all the ATVers and everyone would come and refuel at. They had a barbecue pit there and everything, and they had inside a statue of a Bigfoot, and they were selling some Bigfoot souvenirs, and we asked them as well, and they were like, people talk about the stories, but they weren't really aware of any that had happened in that immediate vicinity.
Hmm.
So it's like a kind of cultural presence, but I also get the vibes that, like most places in America now, North America, I'd assume as well,
Mm-hmm.
wherever there's woods and mountains, like Bigfoot kind of comes culturally with that.
Yeah. Yeah.
So I've noticed that in recent years, even here on the East Coast, where, as a Bigfoot investigator, whatever chronicler of stories, I know that there's been reports all throughout New England. But now what you're seeing is, if there's forests and mountains, the souvenirs start incorporating Bigfoot. Everyone starts putting,
Exactly.
in Maine, they're like, Bigfoot stole my lobster, and just all that kind of stuff, like T-shirts.
That's awesome. Yeah.
Washington, even when I was up there a couple of weeks ago with Eli Watson, we saw Bigfoot Mount Washington sticker. Even a few years ago, I'd never seen any Bigfoot New Hampshire related stuff, because it was mostly just word of mouth stories and people had seen things. So I think now it's like almost culturally that you have Bigfoot showing up if there's mountains and woods. And maybe that's the case in the Mogollon Rim as well. They're just sort of embracing Bigfoot as a touristy thing, but at the same time, they have their own local variant with the Mogollon Monster.
That's awesome. That's awesome. Yeah. Hey, how soon does the Chasing Legends season come out? Is it getting closer or
yeah, so we're basically thinking the episodes will start rolling out in 2021 at this point.
Okay.
We're obviously COVID pushed back all our production dates and everything, and so we are filming our final episode in October in Louisiana. So about the Rougarou, yeah. So
sorry, I was like, I can't remember.
No, that's
public or
that's
not.
fine. That's fine. Yeah, we've talked about a lot. But yeah, that's our final episode. After that, we're wrapped, and then then starts the editing and
awesome
whole process. So yeah, it'll be 4 episodes. Each one is chronicling a different legend. Obviously, we did our Lake Champlain episode recently in Vermont as well, which was great. Mogollon Monster's been done. Pukwudgies, that was done before COVID even started. So there was a little bit of a discrepancy between that, but travel was shut down for a while. So
yeah, exactly.
We're making it work, pandemic or not.
That's right. Nothing can stop you. That's awesome, man. Well, thank you for taking a few minutes out of your night and chatting with my group about the Mogollon Monster. That was fun. But
if any of your listeners are in Arizona, I would say definitely go up and check out the Rim, especially if you live in like the Phoenix area. It's a totally different environment. It's not the sweltering desert. You go up to Payson. It's like, I understand Flagstaff is pretty similar up in northern Arizona. It's in the mountains and there's a lot of snow and woods. And if you're into that kind of stuff, it's just an alternative to desert.
Nice. Cool.
And you have a monster there. So.
All right. All right. Thank you. Thanks for coming on, Aleks.
Yeah, thanks for having me.